The Switch 2 was finally revealed about 3 weeks ago. It was abruptly unleashed into the public, and I've gotta say, I don't know about you, but it feels like time has been kinda flying by. But to be fair, according to my estimations, it has not been flying by enough, okay? We need to speed things up, we need to keep flying, because I cannot wait for that Nintendo Switch 2 Direct on April 2nd. I'm sure many of you can relate to that as well, but let's not get too crazy. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, because a couple days before that is Xenoblade X Definitive Edition on March 20th. Two events we've been begging for so long, for them to happen pretty much back to back. It feels like a filler arc until then, you know what I mean? It's just this awkward waiting period, this endless now, if you will. With Xenoblade X being on the Switch, that means that all of the Xenoblade games are going to be on one console. A decade-long franchise of niche JRPGs coming together on one of, if not the most successful console of all time. Just think of how crazy that is. I'm not saying there aren't other franchises that have been rejuvenated and have made returns on the Switch 1. That's part of why that console is so great. But Xenoblade is a little different. I know it might seem unbiased here, but hold the line, bear with me. Xenoblade has been there since the very beginning all the way to the very end for the Switch. And I truly believe that when you look at all of Nintendo's first-party IPs, Xenoblade is the backbone of the Nintendo Switch. Xenoblade is the MVP. Now, if you didn't already know, Xenoblade is developed by Monolith Soft, and by just looking at their company portfolio, you should be able to immediately understand how much it carried an entire generation. So then why are we talking about Xenoblade in particular? Why is this franchise so important in the face of all these other titles? Especially when two of them are Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. You see, when it comes to Zelda, Monolith Soft helped in a variety of ways, most notably game design, programming, and topography. This shouldn't be that surprising considering their expertise in designing enormous worlds on underpowered hardware, but here's some food for thought. If it wasn't for their prior work on Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade X, it is very likely that the modern Zelda games would not have been as impactful as they are. Hell, if it wasn't for Xenoblade, Monolith Soft may not have worked on them at all. That has catastrophic implications, because one of the biggest reasons for the Switch's success was launching with Breath of the Wild. They have become inseparable. You cannot think of the Switch without thinking of Breath of the Wild. And while it's easy to take for granted, let's not forget that this was a huge step forward for Zelda's popularity. At the time, it was not a safe bet that people were going to buy a Switch for Zelda. In fact, most of the anticipation for Breath of the Wild, and thus the Switch, was specifically because of that open world. So imagine how different things may have been if Xenoblade never existed. To put it romantically, Xenoblade walked so Zelda could run. And of course, Breath of the Wild's success ended up changing the entire gaming industry, let alone Nintendo. There's a huge ripple effect that you can really go into here, but my head will start hurting if we go that deep. All I know is that judging by the Goofy collaboration with Xenoblade 2, Nintendo was counting their blessings. Speaking of which, any new console needs to have a killer holiday season, and the Switch accomplished that with Super Mario Odyssey and Xenoblade 2. Now, obviously Xenoblade cannot compare to Mario in popularity, but it did fill a very important hole in the Switch's catalog. The Switch may be known as a JRPG machine today, but back then, Xenoblade 2 was far and away its premier JRPG. It ended up selling 1 million right off the bat, but what's most impressive is its unexpected amount of staying power. Its sales growth is still the best in the franchise. It has more than doubled its launch figures. I cannot stress this enough. For a niche IP of a niche genre, that is remarkable. And Nintendo must have realized that, because despite being the first Xenoblade to release on the Switch, it still has the least frequent discounts. Fun fact, in Australia, there are a few games that are priced higher than usual, namely both of the open world Zelda games, and only Xenoblade 2! Please, if you have any idea as to why that is, or if it's the same thing in your region, feel free to enlighten me. That being said, I have expressed before that I do wish Xenoblade 2 was delayed a few months for the sake of polish. Not only did it have a relatively short development time, most of Monolith Soft had to focus on Breath of the Wild. It was to the point that literally everybody, including myself, doubted that it would even make it to 2017. It wasn't until September, 2.5 months before, that an official release date was finally unveiled. They cut it so close with that game. So yeah, I'll take that crossover as an apology. Though, in the grand scheme of things, maybe those circumstances were for the greater good. Xenoblade 2's success as a holiday title is what cemented the value of the brand to Nintendo. Nintendo knew it could always rely on Xenoblade. When Nintendo needed Xenoblade, Xenoblade was there. Who was there in the Switch's first holiday season? Xenoblade 2. Who was there in 2020 at the height of the pandemic? Xenoblade 1. Who was there when Splatoon 3 had to be delayed? Xenoblade 3, one of the rare cases by the way, where a game came out sooner than originally announced. And finally, who is going to be the swan song before the Switch 2? Xenoblade X. Whether it was Nintendo in trouble or the entire world, Xenoblade was there to help douse the flames. It may have never been the lead singer, but it was whatever band member it needed to be. Hell, if we count the expansions and the Smash DLC, Xenoblade has had a presence almost every year of the Switch's lifespan. It was a constant reminder of what the Switch is capable of while selling reliably to a passionate fanbase. And here's another fun fact for you. As of this video, only 5 IPs have had the honor of being the closer of multiple general Nintendo Switch Directs: Zelda, Smash, Mario, Splatoon, and Xenoblade. Now yes, if we're talking purely about sales numbers, Xenoblade is not on the same planet as those other IPs. It has yet to break through to a mainstream audience, and realistically, it probably never will. But what the gaming industry today really needs to be reminded of is that mainstream profitability is not the end-all be-all. It is not the only indicator, or even the most important indicator, of impact and legacy. Think about all the smaller Nintendo IPs that people are clamoring for, regardless of whether or not they think it sell over 5 million copies. Think about the smaller IPs that Nintendo brought back, regardless of the fact that it won't sell 5 million copies. Think about how one of the most oversaturated genres at the moment, Metroidvania, is named after 2 games that are nowhere near as popular as your Marios or your Pokemon. It's not all about sales. If you want to talk about that, that's a whole nother corporate conversation. But if we're talking about influence, if we're talking about timing, and especially consistency, there is no other franchise on the Switch that even compares to Xenoblade. And this is one of the many things that makes the Switch 2 so fascinating. Will Xenoblade continue its momentum? Will Monolith Soft continue to be a pillar of Zelda? Will a whole new IP end up following Xenoblade's footsteps? Will any of these questions even be addressed in that April Direct? I personally would not expect a major release until next year, but with how essential it has been to the Switch's foundation, I would not be surprised in the slightest if Xenoblade had some sort of presence on April 2nd. There is so much that we can speculate about, but for now, I just wanted to pay a little bit of a tribute to this crazy era that we just lived through. Honestly, the Switch was already a shoo-in for one of my favorite consoles ever, but when you add Xenoblade into the mix, it is indeed my favorite console of all time. Even though I'm so glad we're moving on, even though I've been kind of sick of it for like 2 years at this point, it really is. It's my favorite of all time, because just like how so many people, pretty much everybody, can't think of the Switch without Breath of the Wild, I can't think of it without the entire Xenoblade franchise, my favorite franchise. And even if you don't like Xenoblade, you've gotta admit, it must be nice. And yes, I can confirm, it is pretty nice.